Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz or at Banking Day. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 18 in our series for 2024, and today's date is Friday, May the 31st. First, I'll be talking to Steven McKeon, founder and CEO of MacGyver Tech and MacNerd, about why governments around the world are moving to control TikTok. And I'll be talking to economist Craig James about what's ahead in the market next week. But first, let's talk to Steven McKeon.
Well, Stephen, you've got concerns about TikTok. Tell us about it.
Well, my concerns are unfounded. About 4 or 5 months ago, probably about 5 months ago now, our company was hired to help a US-based company with a ransomware attack. They were ransomware by a Russian, entity demanding a bunch of Bitcoin. So we were pulled in to help them figure out what happened and triage the situation. So while we're doing that, we put kind of the detectors into their network just to kind of see what was going on, to kind of get a beat on the bad guys. While we were doing that, we saw a decent amount of data going over into China, and we actually thought it was the bad guys. But lo and behold, it was actually TikTok data coming from the user apps on their phone while they were using it at work, which also raised another, kind of concern for the employers. But it was kind of really odd that, why is that app sending all this data over the mainland China? As somebody who builds software apps and stuff, usually you try to find the shortest distance from where you are to like a data center that can process it. They were not doing that. So that was just something that jumped out at me as thinking as really kind of an odd behavior. And then I've reached out to a few other researchers in my space because our job was not to kind of look at TikTok. Our job was a different scope. But I was curious. So I reached out to a few other people in my space, and there was another company that found out there's a thing called app collusion that it does. And what it'll do is it'll use other apps to get permissions to do things that it's not supposed to do. It's saying as I was finding odd behavior. Looking further down that rabbit hole, I found others finding it too. And I'm sure some of the reasons why our government's having some, national security concerns about the application.
So MacNerd has found some real issues with TikTok.
I got to say, I saw some things that are definitely alarm bells. I mean, here's the thing is, they're copying data or sending data over into China from the app directly. It's hard for me to tell what they're doing with the data once it goes over there. And like I said, I found this by chance, really. It wasn't something we set out to go, hey, let's go find out what this TikTok data is doing. So my scope was limited in that kind of an area, but I found out things that kind of made me concerned where, I deleted the app on my phone. And somebody who has built a decent following in there, I feel like it's not a safe thing to have around things that I'm doing.
Now, in the past months, the US House of Representatives has passed legislation that would ban TikTok in the US. And a lot of other countries have done that too. And that's assuming ByteDance, the company's owners, sells its stake of ownership of the app to the Chinese government or provides the Chinese government with access to the data it collects. Would that be correct?
Correct. And I think banning TikTok is a bit of a harsh oversight of what this actually think it is. The government, US government, is forcing a Chinese company that's controlled by the CCP to relinquish control of that company and be managed by an American company that could be under better regulation. Not to say like Facebook or Meta or better companies, but there at least some kind of pressure that could be applied to them if they did nefarious activities, which all of them seem to do. These guys might be doing a little bit worse than others.
There's also the concerns that the Chinese government can be using TikTok to spread misinformation and propaganda and influence viewpoints in the US. Would that be correct?
I would say that's probably accurate. The thing about TikTok is it's interesting application because there's a sister company called Douyin that's actually in China that is the exact opposite of TikTok, actually, if you think about it. It's mindful, it's educational. It definitely spreads more good things of the humankind. Where if you go to other ones, I call them TikTok zombies. They get sucked into a vortex and they're just flipping after flip. And then 5 hours go later, they don't even know what they did. And, is that healthy? Are they learning anything? I just don't You know what I mean? It's why is there a version that's much more mindful for the Chinese, citizens, and that version's banned in America, and then the TikTok version we have here, it's really popular, and all these people say it's great. It's actually banned in China. Why is that? Why can't they have it over there and they have to have a different version of it? That just raise more flags. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now there are issues though in the US. I mean, those against the banning say it goes against your First Amendment right of free speech.
Right. Yeah. So that's the argument I believe ByteDance is trying to make in their defense is they're trying to use the First Amendment argument. But here's my take on it. But I am not a lawyer. I just, as I said, I'm getting educated myself in these areas that aren't technical. But from what I get for the one, the First Amendment argument is, maybe 100 years ago, let's say there was two printing presses, and then say I wanted to be a bad person and it's only put out filth that's going to be my magazine and was causing harm to the public. That is probably where that can be applied more. Now there are many companies that do similar things to TikTok. You got YouTube, you got Instagram, you got Twitter, and there's so and so forth, other ones. So it's like they're not the only kind of monopoly in town on this area. And kind of doing the argument of the First Amendment, speech, I think is a slippery slope at best. It'd be a hard thing for them to win at, I believe.
Well, users of the app say they can freely communicate on about political topics that you can't really do on Instagram, which is owned by Meta, or X, well, formerly known as Twitter, which have very strict fact checkers and censorship rules.
That is a very good point. Actually, as somebody who is, so my MacNerd brand is in the blockchain space. And, I did on my TikTok when I first started it, I grew it on the blockchain kind of stuff, Bitcoin, Ethereum, you name it. The funny thing is, a lot of my content was shadow banned, or they would basically suppress it and have certain ways of making certain information be more popular or not. And I've only been able to work around that is because I have a decent Twitter following. I would take the same video, post it on Twitter, said, hey, TikTok just banned this or stopped this from being displayed, and also tag TikTok at the same time. That usually worked in them kind of changing things. But I think there are some censorship to some degree. Maybe it's just in a different way. You
And
know what I mean? If they just don't see the content, it just won't be it won't be pushed as much. And how TikTok does it, from what I learned, is the first video you put out there within the first hour, they put out to 100 people. If it does well, and that 100 people, they move it to 1,000-person block. Then they move it to a bigger block, and that's how they kind of escalate it up. Where other platforms like Twitter, it's just a natural repost and stuff. It's like a different tiered system, how it promotes videos.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of my fascinations is also following US companies. And there is a view that banning TikTok is a ploy by Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, to eliminate competition and maximize their profit. And last year, the Washington Post actually ran a piece that Meta hired a GOP consulting firm to swing opinions against TikTok.
I mean, that is competition. I mean, that's not uncommon in that space. I mean, if it went to Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, I would be very disappointed. That's for sure. I mean, I agree. He does have a bit of a monopoly. He has known to be not the most morally, well, actually, put it this way, he's morally flexible.
Yes.
Is a one way of putting it with him. So I feel that going in his hands will be a bad move. But there's other players. Maybe Elon probably shouldn't do another software company because he's not done a good job at Twitter. But I believe there's others that, would at least, I would think, change some of the algorithms to not be maybe doing that shadow ban thing. Because I'm sure I'm just one slice of how they're kind of controlling the agenda there. I hear they are trying to do some AI bot detection stuff on TikTok. So I do believe they're trying to do some good things, but just somebody who deals with our adversaries like China and Russia in the cyberspace, having something to control by the CCP, and as powerful as that platform is, I think is raising a lot of alarm bells, and rightly so, why I think our government is kind of getting a lot of stuff going on in this area. I don't know. I mean, my thoughts is it can be a great application, but I think it also can be causing some harm because does have a very addictive nature to it that others don't have, or at least are trying to imitate.
Indeed. And as we can see with what Russia's doing is that they are using technology in ways that undermine business and political interests in the US.
I believe that. And also the advent of AI now is the great accelerator. So everything is speeding up. Cyber events, put it in perspective. We've had one customer alone. We fended off 100,000 hack attempts in 30 days off of one customer, one website. That is unprecedented.
That's extraordinary.
That's a lot of numbers. I mean, just for one website in a small window, that usually would take a year in the past.
That is extraordinary, Steve. That is just extraordinary. And look, thank you so much for your time and your insights. And I'm sure they're very valuable. People will be fascinated by it. And
I hope so.
Please, thank you. And let's keep in touch. Thank you.
Okay.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
And now let's talk to economist Craig James.
Okay, well, Craig, what's happening in the market in the week ahead?
Well, we have got two probably sort of major sort of pieces of data. One is the Australian GDP or economic growth figures coming out on Wednesday, and for the United States, it's the non-farm payrolls, which is coming out on Friday. But it is a packed week. Basically, with each change of seasons, you tend to get this. So we're moving into winter, and at the start of June, we've got a lot of indicators coming out. So we start off on Monday with the ANZ and Indeed job ad series, so a measure of employment. Then we've got the Melbourne Institute inflation gauge also coming out on Monday. That's really the only piece of inflation really over the week. I suppose you get the inflation figures of some sorts in the GDP figures, but that inflation gauge is pretty much up to date. So we'll get figures for the month of May coming through there. We'll get business indicators, government finance, balance payments, retail trade on Tuesday, GDP or economic growth, as I mentioned, on Wednesday, and then we'll get international trade on Thursday with building approvals. And then on Friday, we will hear from the Deputy Governor, the relatively new Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, Andrew Hauser, will be speaking yesterday, and we'll also get the housing spending indicator. A lot coming out in the United States as well. Measures of business activity coming through with the Purchasing Managers Survey, and as I say, yes, the highlight is the job figures coming out on Friday.
Well, how do you expect the GDP figures to go? I mean, they look fairly flat at the moment.
Yeah, flat is probably the best description. Yes, so we've had gains of 0.2% for the last couple of quarters, and I think 0.2 basically would do it yesterday again. We can't rule out negatives given the fact that we have got fairly soft readings in terms of household spending in particular. But what we're likely to get, sort of is the annual rate coming down yet again to around about 1.1%. So normal economic growth in Australia is somewhere around about 2.25% to 2.5%. If we get 1.1%, it shows that the economy has slowed quite dramatically under the weight of higher interest rates and a higher cost of living. And of course, this is designed, the whole idea of increasing interest rates was to get supply and demand back into balance and therefore put downward pressure on prices or the rate of inflation.
And so the slower economic growth was a function of interest rates?
Yeah, very much the case. It's also the higher cost of living generally. So interest rates are going up to slow the economy down and get inflation, supply and demand back into balance. But we also got higher inflation. And of course, you've got high mortgage costs. It may be sort of health costs. Housing in particular is being a substantial contributor to inflation. And of course, if people are paying out more in terms of their mortgage, they're paying out more at the supermarkets and the like, it's more likely that they're going to restrain their spending in other ways. And what we're seeing is that essential type spending, basically the things that we don't like to spend our money on, they're the ones that continue to be paid. But the discretionary or the like to have, sort of like going out to the football, going out to the movies, so cafes and restaurants, that spending has been pulled back somewhat.
What do you expect with the inflation figures?
Well, we do expect that the inflation will come down in coming quarters, and by the September quarter figures or the December quarter figures, we could get, and it'll be artificially done, but we could get the inflation rate below 3%. And this is part of the cunning plan, if you like, from the federal government. Then they're giving out energy assistance payments, and some of the state governments as well providing some assistance in terms of energy costs. That has a direct impact in terms of inflation. And the hope is that if you get the headline rate of inflation down and get that down quickly to something like 2.5% to 3%, that underlying inflation will follow. So we'll get all the landlords, all the businesses saying inflation is no longer 3, 4, or 5%. It's more likely to be 2 or 3%, and then you start locking in lower rates of inflation. So that's the hope for what the federal government is doing in terms of providing this energy bonus.
Yes, certainly, and the government's thinking, or the budget papers project that inflation will be down to a manageable level by about December, which is when the RBA might move with interest rates.
Yes, that's the interesting part. The Reserve Bank board members have got to have confidence that inflation is sustainably down. So you can artificially get inflation down through these one-off adjustments like the energy assistance payments. You can get it down artificially, but the Reserve Bank is not going to cut interest rates until they're confident that it's sustainably low. And that will be the interesting point, because we will probably late this year, early next year, be heading into an federal election. And the federal government certainly has got the timing in focus with how the inflation figures perform. And if interest rates are coming down, or at least projected to come down, then that's good news for the incumbent government as well.
Certainly, and I mean, if interest rates are cuts, even maybe not December, but in March or February, that'll still be before the federal election, which is in May.
Well, yes. So the timing of the federal election is very much one which governments feel that they're right to be able to make that judgment of when the election is held. We heard about the snap election, in the UK, basically because, so the Tories thought it was their best opportunity to at least retain some of the seats and not get, sort of total wash out. Inflation's come down in the UK. Interest rates are likely to come down as well. So the UK government certainly made its timing, sort of very, very well on the back of the inflation interest rate figures.
The killer here with inflation is housing and rents and property prices.
Yeah, and it gets down to supply and demand. It's a funny one. So it's basically sort of, I suppose, a catch-22 situation where we've got more workers coming into Australia, and they need places to live. And of course, they're coming into Australia because we don't have the skills in certain sort of areas. People are coming in from overseas, but they're finding it hard to get sort of house. So we're part of the people. Some of the people that we have to bring in are those that are building the houses. So we can't get sort of supply up until sort of we have the labour come through, and it's basically sort of trying to catch its tail a bit. But what we think is that we do have a substantial amount of homes that are being built at the moment. By late this year, and at least by early next year, we'll have sort of plenty of sort of homes to be on the marketplace. And at that point in time, building is going to slow down quite dramatically because of the higher interest rates and the cost of living that we're seeing over the last 12 to 18 months. So we follow this cycle through. So building approvals come down, and then they'll have to go back up again, basically because population growth continues to remain quite firm. So it is a case, in terms of rents, and then the case in terms of the actual prices for new homes being purchased by people.
Well, the other issue too is unemployment. That's rising at the moment.
Yeah, it is. It's lifting a little bit. So on a trend basis, it's basically been moving up. So we had the low point was probably sort of around about 3.5, 3.6%. So now it's up around about 4.1%. You could throw a blanket across all the states and territories in terms of the jobless rate. 3.8% to 4.2% is basically where they're sitting. And what you would say is we're at full employment. If anything, we're probably a little bit over full in terms of employment, and that's because we've seen wages rise at sort of fast rate of not because of those pressures. But as you mentioned, so the job market is slowing down, but it's only slowing down very, very gradually. And one of the things that's holding it up is the fact of demographics. The fact that baby boomers continue to move out of the labour force, move into retirement, and we just don't have the young people, sort of around the place to be able to fill in that void. So we continue to have to bring people in from abroad, and it means that while the unemployment rate is rising, it's probably not going to rise like it did, sort of in past downturns or recessions, where we saw in the 82-83 recession, it went from a sort of 6.3% to 10.5% in a very short space of time. Then it took 7 years to get back down to 6.3%. The natural rate of unemployment is a whole lot lower because of the demographics, and it's probably sitting, sort of somewhere around about 4%.
And that would actually see inflation coming down as a result. Would you say that?
Yeah, the easing of the job market, a modest easing of the job market, means less upward pressure on wages, and it means that businesses haven't got to continue lifting interest rates. Continue lifting, so the prices for their goods.
Okay, well, Craig, that's all fascinating, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So what's happening in the news? Well, inflation has climbed for a second month to 3.6% in the year to April, from 3.5% in the month before, confounding expectations that consumer price growth would restart its downward trend. The latest report from the Australian Bureau of Statistics is the first since Labor's budget earlier this month, which announced billions in new cost of living subsidies aimed at assisting struggling households, while also lowering the measured rate of inflation. Economists, however, have warned that additional spending on energy rebates could free up Australians to spend more in other areas and add to underlying inflationary pressures. And Lease will end its global ambitions. It will end all international property development and sell its overseas construction divisions, marking the biggest shake-up at one of Australia's largest real estate groups since it sold MLC to the National Australia Bank more than 2 decades ago. The company will confirm plans to exit or sell more than $4 billion worth of international works, mostly in the United States and United Kingdom, in the next 3 years, ending its decades-long quest to be a globally significant property builder. Lease's board has signed off on the plans and presented them to shareholders at a strategy day on Monday. Money raised from any asset sales will be used to pay down debt and return capital to shareholders. The offshore retreat leaves Lease's construction and development activities focused on Australia, where it has historically operated much more profitably, building the likes of Barangaroo in Sydney, Melbourne's Docklands and the Brisbane Showgrounds. The board is expected to ask Lease Chief Executive Tony Lombardo to oversee the offshore divestments. The first asset sales are pegged for this year. The retreat, expected to take a few years, will start on Monday, when Lease marks more than $4 billion of offshore businesses and projects for sale. While the board is tearing up the company's global ambitions, it wants this reset to stop short of a fire sale or expensive demerger, hence the multi-year time frame. In other words, Lease's board has waved the white flag on its global construction and development strategy, finally agreeing with what investors have told it for years. It's just too hard. And Australia's Home Affairs Department, which is responsible for immigration and security, is ill-prepared for rising cyber and border risks, is too focused on crisis management, and is ridden with high leadership turnover, according to a new audit. The review also identifies a deep divide between the department and its Australian Border Force ABF unit, which manages the customs function and raises $22 billion annually, making it the second largest revenue collector after the tax office. Some staff often do not consider the ABF to be part of the Department of Home Affairs, the review noted. The Home Affairs Department was found to have relatively weak collaborative relationships with central offices such as the Prime Minister's Department and intelligence agencies, according to the review, led by retired public servant Ian Watt. This had fueled a lack of trust in the department, creating a challenge for its relatively new secretary, Stephanie Foster, and a boss, Home Affairs and Cyber Security Minister, Claire O'Neill. Responding to the review, a stakeholder said Home Affairs was too focused on crisis management. The department need to better plan for what is coming up over the horizon and what are they going to do about it, instead of looking at crisis management skills, the participants said. The review found the department had been led from the centre with a command and control culture which limited collaboration and collective leadership since its inception in 2017. And researchers found that migrants are driving Ubers and not working in skilled jobs. Former federal government migration advisor George Tan, who has released new research highlighting the skills mismatch, said employers often demanded Australian work experience and qualifications. Employers sometimes discriminated against foreign qualifications and non-Anglo names, said Mr Tan, who until June 2022 was a member of the federal government's Ministerial Advisory Council for Skilled Migration and is now at Adelaide University. Local qualifications or recent work experience is often required in fields such as healthcare, teaching, accounting, security services, taxi driving and trades such as plumbing, painting and electricians. Committee for Economic Development of Australia's senior economist Andrew Barker said a failure to formally recognise migrant skills and foreign qualifications, English language ability challenges, and in some cases discrimination, are key reasons Australia is not making the most of skilled migrants. As a result, migrants who've been in Australia for 2 to 6 years earn more than 10% less than otherwise similar Australian-born workers, and it takes 15 years to catch up, CETA research shows. As a result, Engineers Australia estimates there are 100,000 qualified skilled engineers in this country driving Ubers or doing other work that is not related to engineering. Only 50% of qualified engineers born overseas who are working in Australia are working as engineers, a situation Engineers Australia Chief Executive Romilly Madhu has said is an emerging national disaster. Mr Tan's co-researcher Andreas Sabula from Flinders University said the result was similar in all states and territories and across occupations and industries. And Zurich Insurance is planning to use artificial intelligence tools designed in conjunction with the University of Technology Sydney to help process the mental health side of insurance applications in Australia. The move, which comes after more than 6 months of work with UTS Rapido, a research and development hub at the university, aims to speed up the processing of insurance applications by people who have disclosed a mental health condition, removing the need for them to visit a doctor for a report on their condition. While Zurich insists that human beings will still be involved in the decision-making process on insurance applications, it says the AI tools, which have been developed from anonymised data from 7 years of past applications, will allow much faster processing of the data that people wanting insurance provide on application forms. Zurich Australia's head of retail, Jackie Lennon, said using the AI models could reduce the time taken to process an application from 22 days to less than a day. She said removing the need for the applicant to see a doctor also reduced potential privacy concerns. The process has developed 6 predictive models that can be used to assess information provided by applicants who disclose a mental health condition when they apply for insurance. The models reveal a number of conditions that are associated with people more likely to have a mental health problem. These include participation in recreational activities, with lack of participation in recreational activities more likely to be associated with mental health issues, ongoing health issues, including chronic pain, cancer and heart disease, time spent in hospital or having medical treatment in the past 5 years, and having parents or siblings with health conditions such as diabetes, cancer, mental health issues and heart disease. While insurance companies can reject applications based on prior health conditions, they can also choose to issue policies with specific exclusions or loadings. Lennon said a human being will oversee the final decision on policies. Hervé Harvard, the Executive Director of Engineering and IT Solutions at UTS Rapido, who worked on the project for Zurich, said insurance application forms could involve significant amounts of data, including a person's medical history, family background, and personal circumstances. The move comes as the insurance industry is grappling with a rise in mental health claims in Australia. Mental health is the 3rd most common cause for a claim, with Zurich accounting for 20% of claims and resulting in $255 million in payments in 2023. For some of its retail life insurance products, mental health has become the number 1 or number 2 reason for a claim, making up some 35% of claims. And business failures are tracking the highest rate since the aftermath of the global financial crisis, as deteriorating economic conditions coupled with poor consumer spending and interest rate pressures damage the fortunes of many companies. And insolvency experts predict that company failures are set to keep climbing for the next 18 months, despite a rising population and gross domestic product growth. Figures from the Australian Securities and Investments Commission compared poorly during the same period a year ago. The current financial year is shaping up to be the highest rate of external administration and controller appointments since 2011, when 10,757 businesses went under. Business Reset Director and Restructuring Practitioner Jarvis Archer said the country is set to surpass the GFC peak. He said it was facing the start of the insolvency cleanup due to the significant financial impact on many businesses. The lion's share of businesses entering insolvency were construction-related, with 2,398 going under since July the 1st, a 37% increase from the previous period. Retail saw a 39.4% increase in insolvencies to 594 amid thinning margins caused by lowest consumer spending and confidence against the backdrop of higher costs. And rental inflation is expected to soar to its highest level since the global financial crisis and remain elevated until 2026, adding to the cost of living pressure for 1/3 of Australians who rent. Analysis from investment group Jarden tips rental price growth will accelerate beyond its current 15-year high of 7.8%, thanks to a combination of strong migration, low rental vacancy rates and soft dwelling investment. Jarden forecasts rental inflation in Australia will reach 10% through this year, a high not seen since the GFC in 2008, and then remain at 8% through 2025 and stay high in 2026. The firm's chief executive, Carlos Cacho, said there was a lag of about 18 months between asking rents and the ABS rental inflation figures, which is an average of all rents. He said growth in advertising rents were running at about 10% and was forecast to remain at a high of 8.5% this year before easing to 4.3% in 2025. This is likely to maintain upward pressure on inflation and will likely remain a challenge for the RBA as it seeks to bring inflation back to 2 to 3% target, he said. Cacho said that even with the 10% increase in the maximum rate of Commonwealth rent assistance announced in the recent federal budget, the underlying pressures on rents from lack of housing supply to the rebound in migration would persist. Rental pressure is not confined to capital cities, separate research found. CoreLogic figures show 37 of the country's 50 largest non-capital significant urban areas recorded record rent increases in the year to April. Overall rents rose by 6.3% over the year to April, up from 4.9% in the year to January. And Nine Entertainment will launch a review of its television newsroom culture, with the media group's chief executive Mike Sneesby returning from a holiday to confront a growing crisis over the exit of former news and current affairs boss Darren Wick. In an email to staff, Mr Sneesby said Mr Wick had been investigated as soon as a complaint of inappropriate behaviour had been received. Mr Wick, who ran Nine's news and current affairs for 13 years, has been accused of drunken and lecherous behaviour by multiple staff in reports published by the Sydney Morning Herald, The Australian and Sky News Australia. He left the company in March, telling staff that after many long beach walks and even longer conversations, I know in my heart that this is the right time for me to step down. At the time, Mr Wick said he was not retiring, but was rather going to take a very long break after 4 decades of working as a journalist. I'm tired and need a rest, he added. Mr Sneesby wrote, there have been a series of media reports about multiple complainants. At this stage, we have not directly received any information about those complaints, so I would encourage those individuals or anyone else with information to provide it through the process set out below so it can be independently investigated. We will commission an independent review of the behaviours and concentration of power that has damaged the trust and fairness within our television newsrooms. It will be handled by an external firm and provide findings and advice on how we behave and how we can implement better systems and processes for the future. And Stan's publicity chief left the business weeks after it began an investigation into allegations of inappropriate workplace conduct, months before another Nine Entertainment executive exited amid sexual harassment claims. Adrian Fu, Stan's longtime head of communications, left on May the 28th last year after an internal investigation began to probe allegations of bullying and physical contact that made staff uncomfortable. Stan is a streaming platform owned by Nine. Nine has already been under considerable scrutiny over the departure of Darren Wick, the company's former director of television news. He stepped down in March after an absence of work. The Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald and Sky News have detailed allegations of sexual harassment against Mr Wick from current and former female employees. Mr Fu is known to be close to Nine Chief Executive Mike Sneesby, who returned early from a holiday to resolve a growing scandal around the circumstances of Mr Wick's departure. Despite the circumstances surrounding the departure, Mr Fu has been seen at many Nine corporate events since leaving Stan. He is also known to go fishing and on holidays with Mr Sneesby, and first met him when the Nine Chief Executive ran Stan. The allegations against Mr Fu were made by at least 5 current and former Stan staff. They allege that they were the victim of or witnessed Mr Fu's bullying. 2 say Mr Fu would make them feel uncomfortable by hugging them, touching their knees or holding their shoulders. Several have left the business. And a sexual harassment and workplace scandal has erupted within fashion house Country Road Group, seeing 2 highly placed executives depart and the global boss flying to Australia to address staff to announce an external investigation into the handling of complaints at the retailer's Melbourne headquarters. Staff have complained of feeling unsafe, with this confirmed in an email from the fashion retailer's HR boss, who directly addressed the crisis and mentioned allegations of sexual harassment. The South African owners of Country Road, Woolworths Holdings, have called in external consultants to investigate allegations of inadequate responses to allegations, which include sexual harassment, unwanted touching of female staff, bullying and racism. The chief executive of South African Woolworths Holdings, Ray Bagatani, flew out to the retailer's head office in the Melbourne suburb of Burnley in March to hear complaints firsthand, described by witnesses as a highly emotional, angry staff meeting. Staff members are angry over not just the alleged treatment, but also the lack of action from Woolworths Holdings and its failure to listen to the complaints and act with haste to address the growing scandal. Later in one staff email, Country Road Group Chief People Officer Adele Preston conceded there had been some recent experience where some team members have felt unsafe at work due to allegations of sexual harassment. We are confident this is no longer ongoing. However, we are disappointed that it has happened, she wrote to staff earlier this year. It is believed that Mr Bagatani also became emotional in the staff meeting as he was told of the improper behaviour by some executives, with many staff especially aggrieved that they had failed to receive adequate support from the company. Some staff members talked about sexual allegations by one former executive, including sexually laced comments, some staff given unwanted kisses and touching, as well as workplace bullying levelled against another executive. Staff at the fashion retailer's Melbourne headquarters have been offered access to counselling services. The corporate culture of Country Road has hit rock bottoms, insiders claim, and it has come at a time when led by Raju Vuppalapati, the former boss of R.M. Williams, who joined Country Road as CEO in mid-2021 and brought a number of R.M. Williams executives across with him. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Prakash Ramamurthy, Chief Product Officer of Freshworks, about Freshworks developing an AI-powered assistant, Freddie. Using OpenAI's ChatGPT and large language models, the latest generative AI capabilities of Freddie help a wide range of customer-facing professionals work faster, smarter and more effectively. And I'll talk to Rabba